Welcome everyone to Half History Will Travel. I am your host, the Wilder Historian, and in this video we will continue with the life of Patrick Cleburne. When we last left him, he was sailing for the United States, but he would have an uphill battle to climb as an Irish immigrant in America. Patrick Cleburne and his three siblings were on board the Bridgetown as it sailed across the Atlantic. On Christmas Day 1849, he first spied his new country as his ship neared the mouth of the Mississippi River. They stopped over in New Orleans. His oldest brother had made prior arrangements for a job opportunity in the city. The others were destined for Ohio, where they had a cousin who lived there. He had wrote to them explaining the great opportunities available in that state, and they were determined to make a go of it there. William's job opportunity fell through, and all of the Cleburnes steamed up the Mississippi, then the Ohio to Cincinnati. That city was bustling with 115,000 inhabitants. Eventually, William would find railroad work in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and Joseph would move to Indiana. Anne would stay in Cincinnati and remain there the rest of her life. Initially, Patrick took a job as a clerk at a drugstore. It wasn't the well-paying job he hoped for, and he began looking for other opportunities. He was good at his job, and his employer had connections elsewhere. After a winter in Cincinnati, his employer introduced him to a Mr. Freeman who had just sold a drugstore to two doctors in Helena, Arkansas. The doctors were looking for a store manager, and Cleburne was eager to throw his hat in the ring for the job. Freeman set up the meeting, and the doctors and the Irishman traveled down the Ohio and then the Mississippi, arriving in Helena on April 1, 1850. The town was considerably smaller than Cincinnati, with only 600 people. Dr. Charles Nash and Dr. Hector Grant were his employers, and they decided after a short trial period that Patrick was the man for the job. The new employee received a room above the store, which he shared with Dr. Nash, and he was paid $50 a month. The roommates became close friends, and Patrick helped Nash out in a couple of instances. At one point, a Mormon missionary arrived in town to gain converts. Nash organized a public protest against the missionary, and after being stopped from proselytizing, the Mormon entered the drugstore intent on harming Nash. Of course, Patrick was there, and when the man looked to be going for a pistol, the Irishman leaped across the counter and physically threw the man out of the store, warning him to never come back. Cleburne wanted to rise up the social ladder, but he had two drawbacks. He was painfully shy, especially around women, and he was Irish. The Irish suffered from harassment and prejudices, especially in this period of American history. Newspapers regularly ran funny anecdotes featuring knave or dumb Irish characters in between their news stories. If Cleburne was to achieve success, he was going to have to overcome these obstacles. It didn't help that he had a stereotypical Irish name of Pat or Patrick. Joe Maxey was Nash and Grant's apprentice. Needless to say, Joe and Patrick spent a lot of time together. In the fall, when the harvest was coming in, Cleburne spied something that he had never seen before, a large green fruit. He asked Maxey what was it. The apprentice explained it was a watermelon, and it was delicious and that he should buy one. The excited Irishman purchased the fruit and then asked Maxey how to prepare it. Maxey saw his opening to have a laugh and told him he needed to stew it. So Cleburne got out a brass kettle and cut up the watermelon into the kettle of water and brought it to a boil. When the doctors came to the store, Patrick was proud of his new dish and served it to them on a plate with spoons as per Maxey's instruction. Joe couldn't take it any longer and busted out laughing, and when the situation was explained to Cleburne, he chased after Joe, who was running out of the store to get away from the angry Irishman. He had a lot to learn as a new immigrant. He learned to ride, hunt, and even fight. However, there was one thing he did not do, and that was drink. He attempted to drink socially with his associates, but found that alcohol made him angry, and at one point he came close to killing his best friend and employer, Dr. Nash. After that episode, he became a teetotaler and abstained from alcohol. Another factor that kept him from drinking was he didn't want to become the stereotypical drunk Irishman that many of his countrymen were characterized as in this period. In April 1851, Nash would marry Grant's sister-in-law and move out of the store. Cleburne would move out as well in December 1851. Grant wanted to sell his portion of the store. This was Patrick's chance to rise up financially and economically. He put down a $350 down payment, and he would pay off the balance of the $1,150 over the course of the next year. He was now an entrepreneur. In the fall of 1852, a fire consumed most of the town and destroyed a lot of the store, and the merchandise that was saved was ruined by a driving rain that put out the fire. Nevertheless, he and Nash rebuilt, and their business went on. Cleburne quickly entered into Helena's political elite. He attended the Episcopal Church, joined the literary club where he read books about history and biographies, and joined the debating society where he rubbed elbows with the town's lawyers and politicians. He formed a chess club and became its president, and then sought membership in the Masonic Lodge. He rose through the ranks of the Masons and was conferred a Royal Archmason by Albert Pike. Even with his success, he still wasn't in the upper echelons of the area. The social circles of the cotton aristocracy were growing considerably. Grant and Nash owned plantations, not just to enter the social circle, but it was lucrative. Even the lowliest yeoman farmer grew a small amount of cotton because the cotton market was booming. Cleburne would not join that group. Some have pointed to this as evidence that he didn't like slavery, but most historians point to another reason he didn't invest in cotton and slavery. Because it was a boom economy, it was expensive to enter into that life, and Cleburne didn't have that kind of money available to him. One of his biographers stated, "Nowhere in his few surviving papers from this era is there any reference to his views on slavery. Most likely he did not think about it one way or the other. Slavery was an inherent part of society that he sought to join, one more American curiosity to be noted and acknowledged." Even as the part owner and manager of the drugstore, he was not content. He wanted to rise up higher on the social ladder, and the law looked to be his inroad. In April 1854, he and Nash sold their shares of the business, and Cleburne pocketed $3,000. He planned on living off that money while preparing for the bar. He studied under the law practice of Hanley and Alexander on Elm Street in Helena. He got along well with his partners, him and Hanley especially. Thomas Hanley, the senior partner, was an avid reader and studier of history and was a big fan of Napoleon. Cleburne, coming from the English side of the Napoleonic Wars, favored Wellington, so it was common to find the two wrapped in a war of words addressing who was the better commander. In the summer of 1854, Cleburne's life would change when a barely 5-foot-tall man named Thomas C. Heineman entered Helena. The hot-tempered lawyer from Mississippi who had passed the bar in Mississippi at the age of 23 and achieved the rank of colonel in the Mexican-American War made quite the impression on the Irishman. During the 4th of July celebrations, Heineman was asked to deliver a speech on behalf of the Democrats. Each political party made speeches, and after the roaring speech by Heineman, a prominent Whig confronted the small man and they had a pull-apart. They decided that a duel would need to be fought to settle the matter. The men chose bowie knives as their weapons, but their seconds wanted to avoid bloodshed and enlisted the help of Cleburne to mediate the discussion between the two men. He was able to calm the situation down. As his biographer stated, Heineman and Cleburne became not only friends, but close political associates. Cleburne, the shy and reserved lifelong Whig, became the lieutenant of Heineman, the fire-breathing Democrat and street brawler. One reason that Cleburne changed political parties, although it could be said he had never been fully invested in politics as a Whig, was the Kansas-Nebraska Act. The whole political scene in the United States was in flux in the late 1840s and early 1850s. The Whig Party was dying away and two new parties were emerging, the Know-Nothings or the American Party and the Republican Party. This left Cleburne without a political home. He could not join the Know-Nothings because their political platform was based around the idea that the biggest threat to American society was immigrants, specifically German and Irish immigrants. They wanted to limit the rights of immigrants and make it more difficult to become citizens. There was only one party he could join in the 1850s in Arkansas, and that was the Democratic Party. Heineman organized a rally and was to deliver the principal address, but when his father passed away, he left for the funeral, leaving the shy Cleburne to make the speech. The Irishman made 3 points. 1, and this he borrowed from his own father's philosophy, that it was unwise, unjust, and unconstitutional to bar Catholics from the government. 2, that legislation aimed to attack all foreigners was unconstitutional, and 3, that the Know-Nothing cause was a front for abolitionists. Numerous scholars have debated this third point as being his own or Heineman's choice. Again, Cleburne had made no personal mention about slavery in the documents that have survived, and many believe he was indifferent to the matter. However, the choice of his political party and his role as the head of the Democratic Association placed him in a position to support that platform. In September 1855, a yellow fever epidemic visited Helena. For those who could leave, they did, but 3 doctors stayed to take care of the ailing population, Nash, Grant, and one other. Cleburne and Heineman also stayed behind to help the doctors by preparing meals, carried water, and gave any support they could to the doctors and patients. Soon the epidemic passed and Cleburne went back to studying for the bar. In December 1855, Hanley became a judge on the Arkansas Supreme Court, and the next month, Cleburne was admitted to the Arkansas bar and became partners with Alexander. Soon after, he invested the rest of his savings along with Heinemann into buying the Democratic Star newspaper and renamed it the States' Rights Democrat. His political career brought with it an increased danger because of how frontier politics was hashed out. In May 1856, Heinemann approached Cleburne and told him to arm himself and to join him for dinner at a local hotel. Heinemann thought that a political opponent would attack him because Heinemann had called him a mulatto for changing political parties from a Democrat to a know-nothing. Dorsey Rice, the offended party, and two other men approached Heinemann and Cleburne in the street as they walked to the hotel. A series of verbal abuse let loose from both sides, and Rice pulled his pistol and fired it at Heinemann. The bullet grazed Heinemann's arm and hit him in the chest. Another associate of Rice pulled his gun and fired at Cleburne, hitting him in the chest. Cleburne responded by pulling both of his pistols and firing into the group. He hit Rice's brother-in-law, James Marriott. Heinemann recovered quickly, but Cleburne and Marriott's wounds appeared mortal. Cleburne was carried to a room above a dry goods store where Nash stayed with him. The bullet had passed through his right lung and lodged against his spine. It was in such a delicate place that Nash was scared to operate until the patient was stronger. After 3 days, Marriott had died in immense agony. After a week, the bullet was safely removed, but Cleburne never fully recovered. He would write to his brother that, "My lungs have never been well since I was wounded. I catch cold on the smallest provocation, and an hour's excited debate in the courthouse will sometimes fill my mouth with blood." A grand jury exonerated the two Democrats for their action in the gunfight, and they refused to press charges against Rice. Cleburne always felt uneasiness and guilt for killing Marriott, especially since the man he killed had not fired a shot but did have his gun drawn. After the presidential election of 1856, Cleburne left local politics when his candidate won the presidency, James Buchanan. Even his newspaper ceased publication. Heinemann would be elected to Congress in 1858 and push for expanding the institution of slavery into Central America and pushing for more support for the Fugitive Slave Act. Cleburne would be Heinemann's best man in his wedding, but would stop being his close acolyte. Cleburne went back to practicing law, although he had to do so independently when his partner became a circuit court judge. Patrick would dip his toe into railroad construction, but mostly deal in settling disputed land claims. He would eventually partner up with Barry Scaife and Learned H. Mangum. The Irishman, after 10 years in the country, had risen up the social ladder and secured his place in Helena as a successful lawyer and respectable citizen. However, as his life was coming together, the country was beginning to tear itself apart.